As time goes on, books just keep getting better and better, right? Wrong. As time goes on, some books keep getting better and better, others keep getting worse and worse. So I want to talk about some things that I want to stop seeing in books, specifically in 2024, now that it's the new year. Obviously, before I start, these are going to be more personal opinions. Some of them are a bit broader, but some tropes that I dislike are just going to be personal preference, so feel free to argue with me in the comments. I'd love to hear your opinions. So starting off with one that I feel very strongly about, and that is overly dramatic prose that feels like every single line was just written to be the hook of a TikTok or Instagram reel. Now, I could pick out a few examples of this, but I don't want to go at specific authors, especially because some of them might be indie authors, and I feel like that's just mean to specifically target a few people. But I'll explain more what I mean. I feel like that made sense, but I'll explain more what I mean. Some prose can be really hard to read if it feels like every line is overdone. Yes, one of the rules in writing is to say what you feel, not what's the expression? To not exactly describe what is happening and what you see, but instead to describe what you feel. I can't remember the expression, I'll put it across the screen. However, if every single line of a paragraph is like that, it's gonna become extremely hard to read. For example, sometimes just saying "she blushed" is better than spending a whole paragraph on explaining how the red is slowly rising up her neck. Do you know what I mean? It sounds like I'm just describing all writing needs to be simplified. No, I'm not saying that. Obviously, 90% of the time it's great to have detailed description. In fact, it's necessary to create a good book. But what I don't want to do is read a book where every single sentence is like that. Specifically when it's in speech. People do not talk like that. I don't want to be reading speech where it doesn't sound realistic. When a writer has written this wonderful sentence, it's the most perfectly constructed sentence you've ever read, it's perfectly balanced, it's beautiful, and then they've put it in speech, I just want to cry a little bit. Sometimes it's better just to have ease of read for the readers, and then it just creates a much better flow of the book. The second thing, and to be honest, I don't know why I didn't put this first in the video because it is the most important to me, is lack of diversity. Recently, I've been getting a lot of Instagram reels in particular. Don't ask why I've been scrolling Instagram reels, we don't go into that. But I've been seeing a lot, and it's maybe the author showing off their cast. And the cast is just 6 straight white people. Now, I'm not putting down these authors. I'm sure their writing is great. I'm sure their characters are great. I'm sure they're creating a great story. However, it is 2024, especially in genres like fantasy, where literally it's fantasy, you can make it up and that's your world, anything can be possible, and people are still having casts of just straight white people does not sit right with me. Whereas the representation, I think I feel particularly strongly about this because I want to see more representation of LGBTQ+ in young adults. And then obviously that extends onto representation for people of colour, people in minority groups, people with disabilities, etc, etc. Because especially in young adult, this is the age where, as it's targeted at teenagers are growing up. Teenagers are being influenced by the media that they consume. Teenagers should be having an accurate representation of the world around them. Let's say you take a straight white teenager growing up, reading a young adult novel, and there's representation in it. For them, this is great because they're getting a view of the world and it's realistic. But in particular, let's say you have a young black woman who identifies as bisexual, and she's reading this book and she sees that the protagonist is a 17-year-old black girl who is also bisexual. Let's say it's a fantasy book. She's out slaying dragons and, I don't know, maybe she's a pirate and she's sailing the 7 seas. She's out doing all these amazing things. Think how great it is to see yourself in a protagonist in a book and thinking, if she can do all these things, so can I. Because if you're constantly seeing the protagonist as a straight white man, and obviously I've read books like this and they've been absolute favourites. Let's take The Maze Runner. I can't diss it. But for example, I cannot see myself in any of the main characters, particularly because that was basically a cast of all men for the first book, but anyway, that's probably a bad example. I cannot see myself in that main character, but I could see myself in the main character of a young gay woman. It feels so liberating and so modern and up to date, and we need more of it, specifically for children in these minority groups growing up, because they deserve to see themselves in the characters of books just as everyone else does. I'm gonna put some examples on the screen of just books that I've read recently that I really loved in terms of they had like a niche representation in them. Now the next thing, and this is probably more of a personal preference, but long word counts, and I do mean really lengthy. That to me is just really daunting. I know there's absolutely nothing wrong with this. I'm not targeting people, I'm not attacking people for writing long novels. In fact, I'm admiring them because I'm a chronic underwriter and I could never. But there is something really scary and off-putting about long novels, and I want to take the example of The Priory of the Orange Tree. I have been wanting to read this book for eons, for years, genuinely, and every time I go into Waterstones, for example, I'll see it on the little tables that are like our recommendations and our favourite fantasy fiction books. I'll see it and I'm like, oh, that one that I really want to read, and then I pick it up and I just look at how long it is and I cry a bit and then I put it back down and I leave. Perhaps it isn't even that long, but I just feel like every time I pick it up, it just feels really daunting to me. Now, you can probably see in the background here, my little TBR pile. We have on there, actually you can't see it because I think it's hidden by my makeup, but we have Serpent and Dove, and that is quite a lengthy book. And the thing is, there's nothing wrong with these books, but that one, for example, I've had it now for what? Almost 2 years just sitting there, and I always keep putting it to the bottom of the pile because I'll get other books that are shorter that just look so much more manageable to me. I'm not dissing these long books, I'm just saying that maybe let's appreciate some shorter books too, especially because I can really relate to the authors. I love writing books that are on the shorter side, so they deserve just as much appreciation as these really lengthy books do. Now my next one, I'm going to read it off exactly as I wrote on my notepad here. Romance where the two characters don't have any chemistry and it's just who the author wants to end up together. Now, I don't know if this makes any sense, but does anyone get what I'm getting at? I personally haven't read a lot of books like this recently because I haven't been reading romance. It's not been my favourite. And when I say romance, I mean where the main genre is romance. Obviously, I've been reading a lot of fantasy recently, which has subgenre of romance, but specifically where the main genre is romance, when you can tell that the two main characters have no chemistry, there's no banter, there's no feelings. It's just like the two characters weren't made for each other. It's like the author made a love interest that they want in their life and then made the main character like themselves, just kind of so that they can live out the story that they're currently not in real life. I think I've explained this really badly, so if anyone can understand vaguely what I'm getting at, feel free to explain it better in the comments and I will come along and thank you personally. We're going to swiftly move on from that because I feel like that was just the worst explanation I've ever made. And next I'm going to cover a couple of tropes, because I think I have 4 written down here. And these are definitely personal opinion. They might be a bit of a hot take, but let's get into it. The first one, enemies to lovers, but not just any enemies to lovers where one of them is genuinely just outright cruel to the other. And I'm gonna take an example of this, and a lot of you might dislike me for this because it's a very popular book on TikTok and I loved it, to be honest. I love the writing, but that is The Cruel Prince. In my opinion, there was no chemistry between those two. Cardan just pushed her in a river and then ended up like confessing his love or something. I don't even remember, to be honest. It's like, that man was horrible and that should not be romanticized. That sort of relationship should not be glorified at all. The next one I'm kind of on the fence about, but love triangles. I think the issue is I haven't read a book where this has been done well. So if anyone can recommend me a book that I'm going to enjoy with the love triangle in it, perhaps you can change my mind. But I just feel like they're all a replica of each other. There's like one perfect boy who's like the obvious choice, and then there's the other one who's like a bad boy, and then they always end up choosing the bad boy, and I've never, you know, I've never even seen a love triangle where there's one man and two girls, or the main character is queer and there's one love interest is female and one is male. Something like that. Just give me anything. Give me anything to switch up a little bit and maybe you can change my mind. The next one is pregnancy. I know that this is going to be a controversial one, but I just personally feel like it doesn't belong in young adult fiction, especially when you have like a 15-year-old main character and then she gets pregnant, and it just doesn't sit right with me. I can actually see how this could be done well, but personally, if I know that there's like the pregnancy trope in a book, I will not pick it up. I will not read it. The last one, is this even a trope? I don't really know at this point, but the whole good girl, bad boy thing. I kind of covered that in like the first two tropes, but I've had enough. It's giving Wattpad. It's giving 2020 Wattpad. Once again, I feel like with all of these, you could just give me a book where it's done well and I'd probably be converted. That is yet to happen, so feel free to give me recommendations and I'll go check them out. This is just a little one that I feel like is kind of, even I'm not sure on, but that's trigger warnings. Now, if you're reading a book where you've picked it up from the horror section of the bookstore and you know you're reading a horror and it's going to be gory, there is no need for trigger warnings, in my personal opinion. However, if you're picking up a young adult fantasy novel that you think is just like an innocent fantasy with like a subgenre of romance, and then suddenly there's sexual assault or rape, or there's really gory scenes, it just feels like it's kind of come out of nowhere, and possibly there should have been some sort of trigger warning at the start. In general, I almost never don't finish a book, but if something puts me off that bad because it's something so unexpected that I just don't want to be reading, I probably will not finish that book. Now finally, apart from diversity, this is probably the one that I feel most strongly about, and that is smut. Why are we putting smut in young adult fiction? Why are we exposing 13-year-old, 14-year-old children to graphic sex scenes in books? I read a really good post recently on Instagram, and you know what, I'll probably link it in the description because it will probably explain this way better than I'm going to. But the premise was, if I remember correctly, you know, a lot of adults are now reading young adults, and also young adult, I mean most books, 99% of books are written by adults. So here you've got a young adult book meant for teenagers, written by an adult and read by adults. Those adults writing it are realizing that their audience is older than what it's supposed to be, which is teenagers, so they are writing it for that audience, and suddenly we have, you know, graphic sex scenes with 17-year-old protagonists. Not only is it really harmful for a young child, and when I say young child, I mean like a 13-year-old could pick up that book and be exposed to this, which is one, not what they were anticipating, and two, it can be really harmful. I think on the whole, there's nothing wrong with being an author who writes smut, you know, or reading smut. There's nothing wrong with that, but at the correct age and for the correct audience and targeted for the correct people. Since when did young adult and new adult and adult fiction all merge together? It just feels wrong. If you guys agree with me or even disagree with me, please write in the comments. I want to know everyone else's opinions on these because these are just my personal opinions for going into 2024, what we should be seeing more and less of. I have a terrible feeling that I've missed something out, so if I have, I will write that in the description as well. And as I have been mentioning, if you guys can provide me with a book rec with one of these tropes or anything that's gonna prove me wrong, send it to me and I will go read it and I'll see if my mind has been changed. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching.